All right. Well, Alice and Jim, my watch just struck 1 o'clock. Do you want to go ahead and get started officially?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon if you're on the East Coast, and good morning if you're on the West Coast or somewhere in between. Thanks for being here for today's webinar, The Party's Over, Special Event Audits. And my name is Stephen Shattuck, and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Bloomerang, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. And just a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this presentation, and I'll be sending out the recording as well as the slides later on this afternoon, just in case you didn't get those. So if you have to leave early or if perhaps you want to review the content later on, you'll be able to do that. So just look for an email from me in just a couple hours after we conclude. And as you're listening today, please feel free to use that chat box right there on your webinar screen. I'll see those questions, so will our guests, and we're going to try to save as much time as possible at the end for a Q&A session. So don't be shy at all. Don't sit on those hands. We'd love to hear from you and answer just as many questions as possible. And you can follow along today on Twitter with #Bloomerang, and Bloomerang Tech is our username. Love to be chatting with you there as well. And if you're listening today over your computer and have any connection problems, try dialing in by phone. It's usually a little bit better by phone. Just look for that email from ReadyTalk that went out around 11:30 Eastern today, and you'll see a dial-in number there. And just in case this is your first webinar with us, welcome. We do these webinars just about every Thursday. But in addition to that, Bloomerang is a provider of donor management software. So if you're interested in that or want to learn more about us, we'd love for you to explore our website. You can even download a quick video demo and see the software in action. So check that out if you're interested. We'd love to talk to you about that later on as well. So I want to go ahead and introduce today's guests. Very excited to have Alice Ferris and Jim Anderson here. Hey there, friends. How's it going?
Hello. Doing well.
Doing good. And thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for accepting it. I was trying to remember where I saw you two speak, but I think I saw you speak at an AFP event, and I thought the presentation was so awesome that I reached out to these two completely out of the blue. I'm a complete stranger to them, but they said yes. They were very gracious, and I'm just super excited to have them. And before I kick things over to them, I just want to brag on them a little bit. If you don't know Alice and Jim, Alice CFRE, ACFRE, in fact, she's one of the few who has that ACFRE designation, which is very cool. She is the founding partner over at Goalbusters, and she has over 25 years of professional fundraising experience. And Alice specializes in strategic and development planning, capital campaign planning studies, board and organizational training, and executive leadership coaching. In fact, she had one such meeting this morning, so she's dialing in between those meetings, so I definitely appreciate that. And Jim Anderson, CFRE, he's another partner at Goalbusters, and he has over 30 years of sales and sales training experience. He's worked in positions with local media and national research companies like Nielsen Media, Simmons, Scarborough Research, and he is consistently recognized as a top revenue producer. He was even named Sales Executive and Negotiator of the Year. He has those awards to his credit. So I'm just excited to have you both here to talk about special events and seeing how we can get those events maybe working the way we want them to, or finding out if they're actually working for you. So I'm not going to spend any more time. I'm going to hand things off to you two to get us started. So take it away.
Thank you very much. And, you're not a total stranger because we stalk each other on Twitter. So.
That's true. We're Twitter buddies.
Well, welcome once again, everyone. And thank you very much for joining us for this session. This session is called The Party's Over. And the thing that I always like about this particular session is that everyone likes a good party, right? Well, not everybody. Some people in your nonprofit organizations are either party people or not party people. They're event people or not event people. And the line is very, very clear. And so you will have some people in your organization that are really excited about doing your next special event, and you will have some people who will immediately groan when you mention some event that's going to be done 14 months down the line. If you're signed up for this webinar, we are assuming that you're an event person. Whether because you really embrace it and you really love it, or because that's a role that you have to play. So as we go through this stuff, our goal is to think about special events as one of the tools in your toolkit for your fundraising strategies. Now, one of the things I want to emphasize is that part of the problem with events is that people can get really attached to them. Events can really be sacred cows in your organization. I'm sure a lot of you have that event either that you have to run or that's at your organization, or an event that you know goes on in your community even, that is one of those things that, well, they always do that. In our community, Jim and I are actually headquartered in Flagstaff, Arizona, a community of about 55 to 60,000 people, depending on which number you use. And so it's not a very large community, but we have those events that you can schedule your calendar around. There's the hospital gala, which happens the first Saturday of December every single year. There's another gala that happens in February that's roughly the same time every year. There's certain fun runs and 5Ks and half marathon fundraisers that are consistently scheduled. And if you try to touch these things and say, hey, let's reschedule it, or let's move it, or let's cancel it, sometimes people completely freak out because this is something that, quote unquote, they have always done. So I had the experience of working with one of these events. This was one of those sacred cows for a local organization that was not to be touched. In fact, we had gone into this organization to do an overall development assessment. And when I did the introductory presentation to the board as to the process we were going to go through to evaluate their development program, one of the board members, without any hesitation, said, you can tell us to do whatever you want, however, don't touch the fair. And this was a craft fair that the organization did around the 4th of July holiday every single year. And they did it around the weekend that was closest to the 4th of July holiday. So if the 4th of July happened to fall on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, it was perfect. They would do a 3-day craft fair and everything would be fine. Unfortunately, if the 4th of July fell on a Thursday, or a Tuesday, or a Monday, or a Wednesday, they would end up extending the presentation, extending the craft fair to go from whatever that Friday was to whatever the 4th of July holiday was, or vice versa. So it could be up to a 5-day craft fair, which is a lot of work and totally exhausting for the organization. And this was the one thing that the brand new CEO wanted me to come in to evaluate and potentially tell the board to get rid of. So the entire evaluation process that we're going to walk through today actually was a process that kind of came about because we were doing this assessment. We didn't really have a formal evaluation structure in place. And because this was part of the overall evaluation, it was important to come up with something to measure. At the end of the process for this particular craft fair, we discovered that an event that they thought they were making $45,000 on was actually, once you accounted for all the various expenses, was actually netting about $7,000. And I presented this to the board of directors. And to his credit, the person who told me not to touch that craft fair was the first person to raise his hand and say, I move that we end this event. So sometimes numbers do work. So again, the process that we're going to walk through for this presentation today is the process that we developed through that evaluation process for that nonprofit organization. So first we're going to touch on how events can still be part of your toolbox. Then we're going to spend a lot of time going through the evaluation tool. And then we're going to talk about how to evaluate new ideas that come to you if you end up ending an event. So that's our overall agenda. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jim.
Okay. Thanks, Alice. So it's obvious events aren't evil. I mean, you've heard, but you know people out there, maybe you are one of them, that says you hate special events. Because I will confess for Alice on her own behalf that I have heard her say, I hate special events. And but I know when Alice says that, and when I hear other fundraisers say that, what they mean is not that they hate all special events, What they mean is they hate bad special events, and it's really easy to do these events badly. There's a few reasons because of that, and there's a few things that bring out frustrations to you when you are doing a special event. You know, there are going to be certain events that are just clearly costing you too much time. You look at what your return on your investment is, and when I say investment, we're going to analyze this in more detail soon. But when I'm talking about investment, I'm talking about all kinds of things, from your resources, your personnel, your opportunity costs, all kinds of things. These certain events take up way more time than they deliver any type of return. Volunteer management can be an absolute nightmare if you are dealing with a large event or you've got a lot of moving parts. You may need one or more people just to manage all of the free help you're getting. So that can make special events really difficult because, you know, the biggest problem with volunteers is, you know, are all the people, because you just have so many different personalities to manage, and you can run into these little turf wars, and cliques can be formed, and all kinds of things can occur. And people just might not show up for the event, meaning that you end up doing all of the work. One of the biggies is that anybody can do this. You hear this type of thing all the time. You will have a volunteer on your board, or you'll have some member of your team that will point out some event and say, well, because the animal shelter did this event, we should do one just like it. They made so much money, we should do one of those. And it's not always going to be able to be something that can be scaled to your organization or that can be applied effectively with the team and resources that you have. You run into this because everybody thinks that they're an expert. Everybody thinks that they can throw a party, and then they think that's all that this is just throwing a party. In reality, it's far more than that. So there's another one of your frustrations. And finally, not enough money. You don't have enough money to put the event on effectively, or you're not going to earn enough money to make this investment worth your while. All of these can be big frustrations that you have when you're trying to put on an event. But let's keep in mind that there are some strong values to these events as well. There are great benefits when they are done well, and when you're managing them well, when you're evaluating them well, and you're executing them well. So some of the things that you can see as benefits of the events will be the opportunity for you to engage volunteers. It's always a great way to bring volunteers in if that's something that you want to do, or maybe you've got a lot of volunteers but they're not really doing a lot, or they haven't been really active and contributing strongly. It can be a real team building event when a special event is done well. And recognize that some of your volunteers only want to participate in the social elements of interacting with and supporting the organization. Granted, they might give you some cash, and they might show up and help you write thank you letters or answer phones or whatever the issue might be. But some of them, their personalities drive them to be much more interested in the social aspects, and the special event can deliver that to them. Obviously, the ability to acquire new donors is huge. You want to make sure that you are bringing in as many new people to the events as possible, because there can be few things that are as troublesome as throwing a special event and only seeing the same people that show up every year and really not making enough money. I can give you a couple of good examples on this. One of them would be Alice and I have worked with a public radio station in Arizona. We have been their development team for 10 years. And one of the things that we do is, about once a year near our pledge drives, we bring in some type of an act. Maybe it's a musical act, or in the case that I'm about to describe, we brought in Hal Holbrook's show of Mark Twain Tonight. He's been doing this show longer than Mark Twain was alive himself. Now, this station is an NPR, a public radio station, and it is in a southwestern rural area, a lot of agriculture, a lot of military, a lot of folks that aren't big fans of public radio, frankly. But the ability for us to have put together something that had such universal appeal. Mark Twain, like Hal Holbrook, brought out more than 1,200 people to this event, and I would challenge that fewer than half of them had ever listened to the station before. But it was able to create a strong fundraiser for us that perhaps wasn't directly in alignment with our mission, but close enough because we were serving the community still. But it gave us access to donors we had never, donors and attendees that we never would have spoke to before. I'll give you an example on the other end of the spectrum. There's another radio station that we work with. It is in the Midwest. They do an annual gala, okay? And their gala is basically they get some community member or maybe a state politician will come in and do a speech. They charge way too little for the tables that they do. The event only raises a few $1,000s. It has always only raised a few $1,000s, and the numbers are diminishing because the people that show up for this event are the same people every year. Those, of course, who have not passed away in the past year. They aren't generating any new followers. They aren't generating any new attendees. And that is an example of a bad event. And when I was talking a moment ago about how easy it is to do badly, you can think about something like there's a community that we work with that do almost weekly, at least monthly, street fairs during the height of their season. Generally, it's something every week, and it's the exact same thing, and it's pretty darn boring. All it is a bunch of folks get out. You got some craft people there. You get a couple of retailers or vendors trying to sell stuff. You've got some third-tier musician or local band that's playing, and that's about it. And they raise a few bucks, but it doesn't accomplish anything to further the mission of that organization. So when we jump back over to some of the benefits, how you can make sure you don't throw an event like that, also think about the concept that some donors will only respond to a special event. I've spent many years working with a psychological consumer profiling system called VALS. VALS stands for the Values and Lifestyle Segmentation System. If you'd like to learn more about it or take the test yourself, it's 35 questions. Just Google VALS test and you'll be able to do it yourself. But at the core of this program, it says that people are motivated. They only take action based on items that give them the greatest degree of personal satisfaction, and that they will have specific alignment with one of three psychological motivations. The first is principle or ideal motivated. These are individuals who make their decisions based on what is good or what is right. Now, these are the folks who are going to support your organization even if the event wasn't there. But if there, and I see Alice has shared that link with you, if there is, if they are going to try to convince somebody to come to your event, they will say to that other person, we should go because. And the because will be that you are a good cause, that you are doing good work, and we should go to support them, things like that. The second group of individuals are going to make their decisions based on status or achievement. They're going to make their decisions based on what looks good or what looks right. So if they're going to try, somebody's going to try to, and that psychological motivation is going to try to motivate somebody else to go to your event, they're going to say, we have to go because the mayor is going to be there. We have to go because the coach of the football team is going to be there, or so on and so on. It's going to be much more about what it looks like to be at that event. And keep in mind, when you're dealing with sponsors, all of your sponsors have to act like they're status motivated. It's about what they get from this, who they interact with, even if they are personally principle or ideals motivated. And the third group are those individuals who are emotion or action motivated. They make their decisions based on what feels good or what feels right. They're coming because it's a party. And keep in mind that, none of us, we're all unique snowflakes. We all have a different blend of these three personality types, but you'll see that some are dominant. So, how do you determine whether or not an event is going to be successful? Well, you got to evaluate it. Yeah, if it wasn't for that pesky job performance, we would all be experts and end up doing perfectly well in every effort that we have to make. But that's not the way we're going to let special events exist. We are going to evaluate them. So specifically, what is it that we should be reviewing. Alice is going to take you through a few points here on the worksheet that was made available to you. I just want to remind you that the most important thing is that you pick a specific goal and stick to it. And let's just think about the two principal goals that you normally hear people talk about when they say special event. Is it a fundraiser or is it a friend raiser? Is this thing designed to primarily to raise money for the organization, or is this designed to raise awareness and engagement with our audience and potential audience? And I encourage you to pick one of those two and make that the core of what you focus on. And I also will challenge anybody who ever says that if you were putting on a fundraiser and it failed, they call it a friend raiser. That's a lie. If you intended on it being a fundraiser and it failed and you didn't raise money, you might have raised some awareness, but you failed as a fundraising event.
So what Jim is referencing is the special event assessment worksheet that was a handout as a companion to this session. And it is a 2-page worksheet that is the compilation of all of the questions that we end up walking through when we are evaluating an event. And as you can probably guess, other questions come up depending on the nature of the event, but these are a good starting point, and you may end up asking additional questions as you go through your own evaluation process. And if you don't have this worksheet, it can be sent along with the follow-up following the webinar with the recording link and with the slides as well. So the way that this worksheet is set up is that at the top of the worksheet is a description, kind of basic description of what the event was. And this is done obviously after the event is concluding. So the event is already over, and this is the time when you need to take a critical step back. Some people have asked me, how quickly do you do this assessment? Usually I kind of wait for about a week to 10 days to let the dust settle, because if you try to evaluate it immediately after an event, you're going to probably err on the side of making it a better event than it was. So that's the time frame that I'm looking at, is just give yourself a little breathing room before you evaluate it. The first question is about the purpose, which Jim already talked about. Was it a friend raiser? Was it a fundraiser? And did you achieve that? The next chunk is growth. So if this is something you've done before, was this event better than last time? Did you have more attendees? Did you have higher revenue? Did the event just kind of feel better or not? And that's sometimes just a gut feeling thing, but usually if you're looking at about 7 to 10 days after the event, you should have kind of settled on the numbers. So was it better than last year? If it's a first-time event, do you think that the majority of the attendees will come back for another event like this one? So can you repeat it? And that's the big question. It's not the, did people come and have fun? Because you can delude yourself to any degree to say that everyone had fun, it was a great event. I have literally had a conversation after a really bad event once where the president and CEO of that organization 10 days later on a conference call with me said, that was a fantastic event. I think that went really well. When in reality, as an attendee, along with maybe a half a dozen other volunteers standing in the back of the reception, we were all discussing all the things we would have done differently because it was so bad. So you can easily convince yourself that people had fun. Did we have fun? Absolutely. We enjoyed ourselves that day. But was it an effective event? No. So the question for a first-time event is not did people have fun. It is the what percentage of attendees do you think will come back? Because if they will come back, then it's potentially something that you can repeat and sustain. The other thing to ask, oh, go ahead.
Can I toss something in here? I've trained salespeople for almost 3 decades at this point, and I've frequently had a similar experience following a sales meeting, and you might think about it in this perspective as well, that when you when leaving a sales meeting, I would have salespeople that would say, that went great, they loved this, how great was that? And I would turn to them when we were well out of eyesight and earshot of the person that we were meeting with, and I would say, we accomplished nothing. We are exactly where we were when we walked in. And so additionally, as you're looking at this growth concept, you want to make sure that you're avoiding continuances with your attendees. You don't want to end up where you were before they walked in the door. You want to have deepened your relationship and had a more significant experience with them in some meaningful way. That's an advance. You want to avoid continuances, status quo, and you want to have advances and move forward. Thanks, Alice.
So the other two things that factor into growth are expenses and then that kind of gut feeling of experience. So the expenses, I mean, are your expenses going to go up or down if you repeat this event? Did it go up or down from last year if it's already an event that you're repeating? Generally, you don't want to see expenses going up. That seems kind of natural. And generally, you don't want to see things change significantly on either side. So you don't want the revenue to necessarily go significantly up or down as well. So that's the evaluation piece to think about in terms of growth. So the other thing to kind of put this all together with those growth elements is essentially you want to increase the quality of the event, regardless of whether that event is. You want to increase the speed in which you can put it together, because if it becomes more difficult year after year after year, that's not necessarily something you want to continue doing. You want to increase the efficiency, which is related to speed, but it's also related to how efficiently and effectively can you connect with the people who are attending the event or participating in the event, and can you lower cost? And if all of these things are in alignment, then yeah, your event is probably good. If there's a particular area where you're like, nah, that doesn't feel so good, it'll give you an opportunity to focus on one area to make corrections. Or if they're all out of line, then that's when you start thinking about getting rid of the event. The next element on the worksheet is promotion and outreach.
Sure, and I'll touch on just a couple of points that we have here on your worksheet. The first is, did the event contribute positively to your organization's image or brand? This is really a very important point because if you think about some of those events that we've talked about already, think about the ones that Alice had referred to that are those annual events that everybody goes to. And ask yourself, of those annual events that you are a part of or that you are aware of, do people go because they really, really want to go and support the organization? Or do they go because it's really, really a good party? Or do they go because they have to? Back to those three vowels points. Are they doing this because it supports you? Are they doing this because they need to be seen? Or are they doing this because they just want to have the party? And how does that reflect on your organization? You know, are there events that you could be doing that would negatively affect your brand? Things that would leave some people thinking that it was inappropriate for you. We've had experience where there were board members that came away from an event and said that this special event was not up to the standards of our organization, and it is not with the tone and dignity of our organization. In the example that I'm thinking of, I disagreed with them. I thought that it provided some levity for them. But I can totally understand if that is true, and if the overall impression is more than just a couple of people, then you've got a brand image and you need to be aware of it. So, are those things consistent with who you want to be and are you moving the brand forward? And then the second point, I touched on this a bit earlier when I gave you the examples of the Mark Twain event and the gala in the Midwest. Did you reach an audience that you haven't reached before, or are you just interacting with the same people you always see? Because if you are just interacting with the same people that you always see, it's barely more than a dinner party. You're talking with your own clique. You're not expanding your reach. All special events should be expanding your reach. They should be attracting new people so that they can have exposure to what your mission is and what it is that you do, and while they're at this event, learn more about you and potentially support you. Because one of the things that I train is that awareness drives interest, drives action. No one will ever take action unless they have interest, and they can't have interest until they have awareness. Awareness drives interest, drives action. When you're bringing first-timers to a special event, you're doing that. You're giving them awareness and potentially piquing their interest at that time, and who knows, they might take action and give you a donation then. But even if they don't, you've given them at least the awareness part, and the interest and action can follow later.
The other thing that you need to assess is staffing. And this is probably one of the things that tends to be the thing that people don't measure correctly. And we'll go through this a little bit when we hit the spreadsheets for the budget and the financial evaluation. But did you have enough people to do this? And is it something that you can consistently do? Because if you didn't have enough people and it was hard to get those people to come and volunteer, then it's not going to be easier next time necessarily. It may be. Maybe this was the first event and people weren't sure about what they were supposed to do, and so they were reluctant to sign up, but then it ended up being a really good event and then people want to sign up the following year. But really take a hard look at, did you have enough bodies to run the event? Because very often that's the one sticking point that people kind of dismiss. Oh, we'll get more volunteers next year. It'll be fine. But take an evaluation of that. And did you have positions that you thought would be filled by volunteers that you didn't get volunteers for and ended up having to use staff for? Because then that'll add to your cost. So staffing is a big thing to evaluate. And again, keep track of those people that are really excited about the event and say, I want to volunteer next time. Because what you want to make sure is that you've kept track of those names so that you can follow up with them and keep them more and more engaged. The other things that you need to take into account are just kind of the random things. Were there contributing factors to this event that make it difficult to replicate the results, or extenuating circumstances that put this event at a disadvantage? A couple of examples here. One of the events that I participated in when I was on the board of directors of a local symphony was a gala that we were bringing in the Glenn Miller Orchestra to come and perform at the convention center. And we got the event completely sold out. We got all the sponsorships sold, and it was looking like we were going to net 6 figures for this organization, which was a fantastic event. And we did, in fact, net that much money for the organization. And so the board of directors, someone on the board of directors made a motion to repeat the event the following year. And I voted against that motion. And the reason I did that was because the extenuating circumstance that we had for this event was that it was the grand opening of our convention center. It was the first event that was going to happen in this brand new convention center that had been in discussions for close to 20 plus years and was finally a reality. And somehow our executive director had managed to secure the first event date for this new convention center. So the extenuating circumstance was that everybody wanted to get in that building. Everyone in town wanted to know what this place was going to look like and wanted to be able to say that they were there at the grand opening of that convention center. True to form, we ended up doing it again, and what ended up happening was that we could not replicate those results again because, again, it was a unique situation where everyone wanted to be there. Another example about the extenuating circumstances that put this event at a disadvantage were any number of nonprofit organizations that happened to have their major fundraisers scheduled in September, October, November, or December of 2001. And it happened to come up in an organization I was talking to over the last week, where they did have a huge event that they had scheduled for late September of 2001, which obviously was not good timing for doing some kind of festive, fun, goofy event. And they ended up canceling it for various reasons, and important reasons, I think. But those are definitely things that obviously, hopefully, we are not going to repeat the situation and the circumstances that were in that case. So those events were at a disadvantage. This other one was at an unusual advantage for the timing of that event. One of the questions that came up in chat earlier is kind of related to this area, which is the why would you not want revenue to go up? You actually do want revenue to go up, but what you don't want to project is is there an unusual jump in revenue or expenses? If there's any dramatic increase or dramatic decrease in any particular line, that's when it gets a little weird, because then you can't project on that, or it ends up being related to some kind of contributing factor or extenuating circumstance. And that's not necessarily something that makes a special event sustainable. So while yes, you do want revenue to go up, you should have a little bit of queasiness if you're projecting any dramatic increases, significantly out of line increases in revenue. So that kind of leads us to, we already kind of touched on the overall assessment of does it feel right for your organization. So that kind of leads us to the spreadsheet. This is where the money people start to get really excited and the people who are not money people start to zone out. So this is a chart, and there's a lot of things that you can track. In fact, I've had many organizations that track far more things than this, and I've had organizations that track far less. But it's not enough just to count the revenue. Because how many times have you heard a board member say, oh my gosh, we made $100,000 on that event? Well, no, you didn't make $100,000 on that event. Maybe you grossed $100,000 on that, but we'll see how it works out in the end. So you do want to cover cash in your report. And in the evaluation that we're doing, we are looking at kind of direct cash things. And direct expenses are any cash item that went out the door. Anything that was required to make the event happen and you had to pay for it out of pocket obviously is a direct expense. However, other things that are direct expenses can be things that you got donated. So they could be in-kind services, in-kind donations of the space, whatever. But if it was required to make the event happen, it should be included as a direct expense. And then, of course, have a balancing entry for the in-kind donation of the revenue. So that's how you want to do that. But what you really are trying to capture is what was the actual cost of doing this event. And that was the case with this fair that we did the evaluation on. Just because the porta potties were donated doesn't mean you don't count them as an expense. And anyone who's ever done an outdoor event knows that porta potties can be a significant portion of your expenses. And you're not going to go without the porta potties. So because it was required to make the event happen, and because there is some type of cost associated with it, should be included in your direct expenses. So even though a lot of people just track cash out the door, it should be cash out the door plus anything that you had to have. The indirect expenses, whoops, went too far. The indirect expenses are an allocation of time. And this is where that staffing piece that we were talking about earlier comes into play. You need to count not only volunteer time, but also an allocation of your paid staff time. And this is an area where people generally don't record it. So what we're looking at here is if you had a staff person who spent 25% of their time on this event for a given period of time, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever that is, there should be an allocation of that percentage of their salary. If you don't want to allocate benefits, if the person's not full-time, it's really up to you. But there should be some type of cash allocation of that person's time. The other thing you want to do is some type of volunteer evaluation, volunteer time evaluation. The number that's on the worksheet is $18 an hour, which some people have argued is far too high. But if you actually look at the IRS standards for this, that is roughly the IRS standard for how they are valuing volunteer time. You can adjust it for what's appropriate for your market. If you don't think anyone would believe that that volunteer got paid $18 an hour to stand at that 5K check-in desk, then don't use that number. Maybe use $10 an hour, maybe even use $5 an hour, but give some kind of valuation for that volunteer time. And then you should also allocate those assets that you have that are only used for the event. Again, back to the fair for a moment. They had barricades that they ended up purchasing because they were tired of renting them year after year after year. So traffic barricades. They're a social service agency. There was really no reason for them on a day-to-day basis to have traffic barricades. And yes, these at the time of the assessment were probably 5-year-old, 6-year-old barricades. So they had already spent the money, but this is an asset that sits around all the time. So there was a percentage of the cost of that asset that we allocated to the cost of the event. I'm going to switch over to the revenue side for a moment. And what we're talking about with the benefit side is not only the cash in the door. So you should be measuring, of course, ticket sales, sponsorships, back to the in-kind valuation of those services that were donated, any vending, any raffles, any other cash in the door. But you also want to be measuring kind of the indirect benefit. And actually, Jim, I'm going to have you jump in for a second to talk about the whole number of impressions valuation from your magic box.
Okay. Actually, Alice, I'm going to hit on something that you were referencing when you were talking about the value of the porta potties.
Yeah.
Yes, when you think about any trade or in-kind sponsorship value that you're going to get, you should think of them in three tiers. You have must-do trade, you have should-do trade, and you have nice-to-do trade. So as you're going through this evaluation process and as you're securing sponsorships, you want to go after those must-do trade relationships. And must-do trade is anything you would otherwise spend cash for. Alice's example of the porta potties is it is a must-do trade. It is a cash equivalency. You want those types of trades and sponsorships. So if you were able to get that in-kind donation and they wanted some recognition as a sponsor, makes perfect sense. The second is the should-do. This is marketing and promotion. You should be doing a lot of marketing and promotion. So if you can get media partners who are going to be giving you media exposure in return for their sponsorship, recognize them. But depending upon your organization, you may choose to separate your in-kind sponsorships from your cash sponsorships. Personally, I think that anything that's a cash savings should be recognized as that, should be recognized as a cash donation. But I don't have a problem with splitting out media sponsorships in a separate block or something like that. But the third tier that I should touch on is those nice-to-do trades. These are perks. These are things that are donated to the silent auction. You might value them at whatever the dollar amount was that you received on that item, but certainly don't value it at full retail. If somebody gave you, some free water bottles with their logo on it that you're going to be giving away to your runners, I wouldn't count that as a cash equivalency in any way. It's nice. You gave them something nice. It improved their quality, but it wasn't something that you would have otherwise purchased, and that's how you value it. Is it something that I would have to purchase? Is it something that I really wanted to purchase, or was it an afterthought? And that's how you do value those in-kind contributions. Back to Alice's point about valuing impressions. When you are putting together your review or evaluation of just what you got from your exposure, you can think about things like, well, did I get representation in the newspaper that I didn't have to pay for? Okay, if you did, then you can roughly claim, I generally claim 10% of whatever the value of that advertising would have been. If it was a $5,000 ad, I would claim that 10% or $500 is real value to me. When you think about exposure, how many people did you actually saw your logo or participated? If you had your logo in multiple places, they learned more about your organization. Generally, you value those at about a penny a piece. The concept that Alice is talking to is I have a sponsorship evaluation process that I go through. I call it the black box. I put everything in that box. If I get free parking that's made available to me, it goes in the box. If I get a website banner, it goes there. If I get links on a website, if I get logo representation on the back of a ticket, it goes there. All of these different things go into the box. And then I also look at a number of variables as to how effective were all of these things. So on something like exclusivity, I might give a high mark if I was the only person represented in a given category, etc. But anyway, so come up with the terms. Recognize that generally you're not going to give more than a penny a piece or so for impressions, or 10% of the real cost of an ad. Going much deeper than that, we don't have time for today. I would also, I'm going to hold my other thought until the next section, Alice. I guess it's the next section.
Yes, it is.
So, yeah, it is. I'll roll right into it. So it's over. Okay, so the event is over, and what do you do if you decide that you're not going to continue with this event? Well, there's a number of things that you want to try to do. First, obviously, everybody who has participated at this event and in the past, if you have decided that it is time for something to be phased out or to be ended abruptly, you want to make sure that everybody knows that the investment that they made in the project and events that you had created is valued. So be authentic, be sincere in the gratitude that you show. And, of course, make any of those key volunteers for donors aware of your plans to make changes. Anytime that we've had experience where we were going to change something, whether it's programming at a radio station or the nature of an event, we reach out directly to those individuals so that they know, and it generally minimizes any backlash. Obviously, celebrate the past. Talk about how great things had been. But that's also an excellent opportunity to segue to the fact that things aren't really as effective as they used to be. You may or may not be familiar with the organizational growth curve. It's the concept that when you start out in phase one, in which you're forming an organization or event or activity, and if you're forming this event, there's a lot of uncertainty, but you got some leaders that are making it happen. You try things, some things fail. You finally start getting things clicking, and you enter phase two, the normative stage, where if you keep doing the same thing you've always done, you keep getting more and more and more. But you always reach a point in phase three, the integrative stage, that if you don't make changes, if you don't do something differently, the results will start to plateau, or worse, they'll atrophy. And generally what you need to do is you need to shake things up, you need to try something new, and get back into that formative stage so that you can continue to grow. I'll always stay positive. Don't point fingers at anybody if you're going to end an event. Talk about where you're going next, not where you've been or why, in too much detail with most people, why you're not going forward. Understand the concepts of emotional versus intellectual objections. Anytime you're dealing with somebody and they are objecting to what you're doing, and in this case somebody doesn't want you to end this event, ask yourself, is this an intellectual objection? Is it because they disagree with you on the facts? They disagree with you on the money, on the value, on the benefit? Or is it because they are simply emotionally attached to it? Is it an emotional objection? Is it somebody that they knew and loved who was a part of it, that had been a founder of this event or something that has passed away, and that they are still clinging to the service of that individual? Really important that you evaluate all of those different things, or that you address all of these specific issues as you move forward with ending an event. But if you're going to end it, there's a good possibility you're going to need to try something new. You're going to have to replace it with something. So if that's the case, how do you decide what you want to add to your mix in the future? Because it can be really challenging. So when you are going through this process, you have a worksheet. The evaluation sheet for new fundraising ideas is what we're formally calling it. I actually typically refer to it as the automated no pain, no machine, because what this sheet is really designed for, it is designed to help you see what the best new ideas, best new events you might try are, but it's also really, really effective at killing the really bad ideas, okay? Because you'll have people that if you were in a board meeting and you're tossing everything up on a whiteboard or something, and everybody's giving you all their ideas, people are really emotionally invested in those ideas. Back to emotional objection versus intellectual. So if they have pitched this idea, it's very, very hard for them to step back and admit that, you know what, you guys are right, this thing isn't going to perform. That is, unless you use numbers, because the numbers will make the case for you. So look, what you do is you let everybody throw out their ideas, as crazy as they might be. Do it in that, put it in the descriptions on the far left, and then you go through and you rank each of these ideas, these fundraising possibilities, on these 5 variables. So how much money are you going to make? All right. Is this a bake sale? You're going to make a couple $100, or is this going to be some type of an event where you could net, $10, $20, $100,000 off this thing? Is it going to be easy or hard? Okay. Is this something that is going to take a lot of effort to make it successful, or is it something that's pretty much in the can?
And here I want to caution you about working with third-party special event promoters. So folks that might be like golf tournaments, you've got people who will come in and they'll run golf tournaments for you, or stuff like concert promoters, which be really careful with those folks. Because a lot of times when you're dealing with anybody who's hosting a third-party event for you, you have to be very, very careful about what you're committing to. There's often stuff in the fine print that says you have certain expenses that you have to cover. There's things like a minimum number of sales. So they will regularly tell you there's no upfront cost to you, but in reality, you're expected to sell a certain amount of revenue or of tickets, and so you have a financial commitment to them, even though they might claim that you don't. Okay? So be careful if you're working on something that looks like it's no effort because somebody else is going to do it, because in reality, there could be a lot of pitfalls there. Let's move on to the third column. How likely is this to succeed? Is this a slam dunk? If so, give it a 10. If you really have a lack of certainty, or if you really doubt that it's going to succeed, then you rank that a little more on the lower end, at a 1 or in the low range. Uniqueness. Is this a fashion victim? Is it just another weekly wine and cheese tasting? Is it just another golf tournament every weekend, every day of the summer? If it's a unique event that nobody else is doing, give it a high ranking. If it's something that's just a fashion victim that everybody's doing, then you rank it much lower. And is it a mission match? Alice shares the story of a person who did in fact want to, our group that did in fact want to do a wine and cheese tasting, and she had to point out to them, or ask them the question, do you realize you're a substance abuse program, and it might not be the best idea for you to be hosting a wine and cheese program. So think about it. Is what you're doing, is it closely associated with what your mission is? Does it make sense for you to be doing this? Does it scream the name of your organization, or are you deviating from that mission by creating this event, in which case you would rank it much lower? Add all these things together, you'll come up with your point totals. The cream will rise to the top, and those bad ideas that you would have had to battle somebody about in a board meeting, that person will not raise their hand to fight for them once they see what the real ranking is. So there you go. The automated no pain, no machine.
And there was one question in the chat about how to measure success, and really that's the gut feeling factor. It's the, do we think that this is going to work, or is it not going to work, or do we not know? And maybe it's a new event, maybe it's this thing that's never been tried before, so uniqueness is really high, but you have a gut feeling that it's something that will fly with your audience, then maybe you give it kind of a middle-of-the-road success measurement. But if it's one of those things where you know it's been a slam dunk someplace else in some other community that you think it's really going to succeed, go ahead and give it a 10. If you're just not sure, give it a 1 or 2, and then hopefully you're proven wrong or right.
And I think also, Alice, that a smart move would be to look around, look for precedent. Granted, we don't want you to be doing a fashion victim here just because you think it will succeed, but look, has there been precedent for its success? Look at the resources that you have. Do you have the team in place to make this happen? Is it a good fit for your community? Is it the right time of the year? Those are things, variables that I would bring in here when I'm evaluating whether or not I think it's going to succeed.
So to summarize the whole evaluation process that we just kind of walked through, what we want to do is make sure that every event, the people who are involved, whether it's the staff people or the volunteers or the board, remembers the goal of the event. And you have to pick one. It's the fundraiser or fundraiser, and you have to figure it out. The other thing that you want to do is plan for the future. Is this something that you can replicate year after year or time after time? The other thing is, does it make you look good? Does it contribute to your brand? Does it feel right? Is it a mission match? How does that work for your organization? And just kind of the gut feeling of how do we feel about this? Is it time for this to go away? Is it time for it to be retired? Or are we still feeling pretty good about it and we have fresh people coming in time after time? The other thing is count all of the money. So don't just count the gross revenue, count other revenue that may come in that's an in-kind contribution, but also count all of the costs. And then that last part that we talked about was the celebrating and honoring whatever you've done before, and evaluate it before it comes to fruition. So you're not only evaluating an event after it happens, but you're also doing this level of evaluation with the worksheet that Jim just walked through of whether we want to move forward with it in the first place. So I think with that, we do have one page that we wanted to highlight for our website, which is our free resources page. It's the website, the web address is right there, goalbusters.net/free. And these are a bunch of resources and templates, including the 2 templates that we walked through today that are just posted on our website, and you can just download them and copy them and make them your own. We don't ask for emails or anything like that. You can just take them and run with them. So if you need free templates or resources, we have a bunch of stuff there. And if there are ones that aren't on there that you want to suggest, we have a survey on that page as well for suggestions. So with that, I know we have some questions that have lined up, so why don't we walk through some of those?
Yeah, great. Alice and Jim, thanks so much. I've got a little audience here at Bloomerang listening along. I'm getting some really good feedback. Really enjoyed all the tips, and I know people did in the chat as well. And I'm just going to kind of roll through questions. We've probably got time for maybe 2 or 3. We've got one here from Leah. Leah is saying, our director wants to have 5 events a year, which sounds like a lot, with over 500 people at each event. It seems like most successful nonprofits have 2 to 3 events a year. What's your 2 cents on how many events you should have throughout the year? Is there a sweet spot? Is 5 too many? Is 2 or 3 more palatable? What's kind of your feeling there, or does it depend on the organization?
Well, my favorite answer in graduate school was it depends. And I think it does in this case, because if they're smaller events and they feel like you have a different target audience perhaps for each one of those events, they serve very unique audiences, then I don't think that's unheard of. However, if those 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 events, or even 2 or 3 events, are completely targeting the exact same audience every time, then you can start leading to donor and audience fatigue. So if the events are unique enough that they're dealing with different audiences, then I think it's fine.
Makes sense. We've got one here from Brooke, and Brooke's wondering about how to kind of bridge that gap between donors and volunteers. Would you recommend inviting existing donors to volunteer as a way to cultivate them, or the opposite, maybe cultivating your non-donors who do volunteer from you and kind of getting them to give a gift in addition to volunteering?
Well, I think that, as we probably know from experience, the people who volunteer generally are more engaged and generally become better donors, in theory. That's the theory. But one of the things that we've looked at in terms of our work in smaller and rural communities is this idea of the house of philanthropy. And the top of the house, the roof, is the donor pyramid. The base of the house, the foundation of the house, is the culture of philanthropy for that community. And then there are 3 to 4 pillars, depending on how you break it out. And one of those pillars that supports the cash donations is that volunteer pillar. There's volunteer, there's in-kind services and donations, and there's retail, which is kind of raffles and cookie sales and all of that stuff. So the volunteer element can support your donor pyramid. So if you really do feel like you are cultivating donors through your event, yeah, take that into account. That's probably one of those the X factor sections of the, are we doing good cultivation with this event? And if so, maybe we can continue it even if perhaps it's not the highest revenue generator.
Before we move on, I want to toss one point back on your first question about, should we do 5 events? Should we do 2 or 3? I want you to avoid arbitrary numbers. If the decision for the number of events that you're going to do is simply based on the fact, well, we raised $100,000 with one event, we want to raise $300,000, therefore we will do 3 events next year.
Right.
That's arbitrary. Okay, I liken that to the concept of rules without reason are irrelevant. If you've just established an arbitrary number and there's no reason for it, then it's irrelevant to try to achieve those goals.
I love it. That might be a good way to end it. We're getting close to the 2 o'clock hour, and I know we didn't get to all the questions, but Alice and Jim, would you be willing to take additional questions maybe by email or Twitter or something like that?
Absolutely. Although there's one I think I can answer real quick from Stacy about the sacred cow. Good idea to have the volunteers play a role in evaluating a sacred cow event? Absolutely. As many of those volunteers as you can get involved in that evaluation process, the better, because then it's their idea, not yours.
I love it. Completely agree. Well, Alice and Jim, this was awesome. Thanks so much for being here, for sharing all your knowledge and spending the time and working it into your travel schedule. I really appreciate it as well. So it was great to have you. Hopefully we'll have you back again sometime.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for listening along. I know it's a busy time of year, so I appreciate you taking an hour out of your workday to join us. Look for an email from me later on today. I'll send out the recording. You'll get a little survey when we end things here today. We'd love to hear your feedback. We've got lots of great resources on our website, which you can check out. We've got our blog, our video podcast, our newsletter, and our next webinar I'm really excited about. We're going to take a week off, but we are back 2 weeks from today, Thursday the 25th. We're going to talk about overhead, ratings overhead, and measuring the impact of your organization. Definitely maybe a touchy subject, definitely some controversial subject, lots of opinions on this, and we're going to try to cut through the noise. We've got two guests, Richard Newstetter and Barbara O'Reilly, are going to talk about overhead. So if that's something you're interested in, please do join us. That's a totally free presentation, and we've got lots of other webinars scheduled throughout the year. So check out that webinar page. You might see another topic there that interests you. So we'll call it a day there. Have a great rest of your day. Look for an email from me later on this afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you again on another webinar. So have a great rest of your day and a good weekend.